You are listening to an American Free Press podcast. Joining me on the line is Dr. Jane Ourian. Dr. Ourian, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to have a chance to talk about this.
Would you prefer Dr. Ourian, Jane? How would you like me to address you?
Well, it really doesn't matter to me, so whatever you feel most comfortable doing.
I'm comfortable with Dr. Ourian because I did take a look at your CV and it's quite impressive. But I saw an article online how San Diego's Hepatitis A outbreak became the worst the U.S. has seen in decades. I want to get into that in great detail in a moment, but before we do, for the benefit of the listeners, could you give them a little bit of background about who you are?
I am a physician in solo practice of internal medicine in Tucson. I was chairman of the Infection Control Committee at Rondelet St. Joseph's Hospital for about 8 years, and I've been the chairman of the Pima County Medical Society's Public Health Committee for about 30 years, and I'm the president of Doctors for Disaster Preparedness. The issue of infectious disease outbreaks has been something I've been following for quite a while, and that I think is extremely important.
Great. And of course, I know about you because I receive your emails, and you are also affiliated with the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that organization?
The Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, AAPS, was founded back in 1943 and really was an answer to the AMA, which we felt was not really doing its job of advocating for physicians and patients and the right to practice private medicine.
And of course, the motto of that organization is all for the patient. And of course, if anybody does a cursory examination of you and that organization and Doctors for Disaster Preparedness, it's the usual left-wing media is attacking you left and right. I guess you've been attacked by this left-wing media for many decades. Is that right?
Oh, yes, we have been. And if you read what they say about us, you'd think that we were just really awful. We're anti-science, etc., etc. And I just really encourage people to read for yourself at aapsonline.org and come to your own conclusions. We do not necessarily subscribe to all the scientific orthodoxy that's being proclaimed because the method of science is that you need to make observations and constantly be critical.
Wikipedia should be used just for the most perfunctory of information because they're obviously censoring news and information. If you just look at, for example, the entry on Wikipedia for Doctors for Disaster Preparedness, then they will be able to find out exactly where they're coming from. Here it says, according to Bloomberg News, the group was, quote, founded to promote civil defense during the Cold War, close quote, and has been, open quote, transformed over the years into a forum, close quote, on, quote, fringe science topics, close quote, such as global warming denial. So what that is telling people when they're reading Wikipedia, because they selected to put what Bloomberg said right at the top of the entry for Doctors for Disaster Preparedness, what that is telling people is that if anybody doesn't believe in the official line of global warming, they are denying it, and that's a bad thing. It's kind of like Holocaust denial. So if I don't want to believe in the official version of the Holocaust, and I want to say, no, I think it happened this way, I'm a denier. So you are a global warming denier, and I guess I am too.
I would say that they are denying the existence of the evidence that does not support this theory that mankind with burning hydrocarbon fuels is leading us to inevitable doom.
Or we could also say they're global warming emitters and laugh at them while we're saying that.
Well, they are in favor of a full energy rationing regime that will lead us all into energy poverty, which Isaac Asimov back in the 1970s thought was the greatest foreseeable disaster that could overtake us.
So let's get into this article here now. Hepatitis A, first thing I'd like to do, if we could, Dr. Ourian, is to explain to the listeners exactly what hepatitis A is.
It is a viral infection that involves the liver. It makes people sick for maybe a month or so. They become jaundiced. They may have nausea and vomiting. And it is generally a self-limited disease, although it is contagious, and people generally get over it and do fine and are immune to it afterwards. But it is quite a problem while you have it. It is generally transmitted in contaminated food. It's a fecal-oral route that is excreted in the stool, and if you contaminate the food with it, then that's how it's usually transmitted. Although the San Diego outbreak does not appear to involve food handlers, but rather people are getting it from the environment because, I guess in San Diego, they have a particularly filthy environment.
And if anyone wants to find out about that, all they have to do is look at the pictures of the streets where many homeless people are calling their home, which is quite unfortunate in America as we sit today. We went from the shining city on the hill to what we are now. It's a disgrace. I had asked you initially for a comment on this article, and you said the most important public health development was sanitation. But in many places in the U.S., basic hygiene is being ignored. Large populations are using the streets and outdoor areas as a toilet. There used to be punishment for merely spitting on the sidewalk. If we tolerate third world hygiene standards, we will have third world diseases. We can't vaccinate everybody for everything. There is no substitute for enforcing hygienic behavior. There was an outbreak of hepatitis A last year in the Detroit area where I think 14 people died. This outbreak here in the San Diego area, 18 people have died so far. What's happening, Doctor?
I think that we're just seeing a breakdown in our civilization, which includes standards of cleanliness that have been accepted for decades, at least maybe for centuries. Why are we going back to the time when they denied the germ theory of disease? I mean, this is the most important reason why third world countries have such high rates of diseases. They do not have clean water and sanitation.
What is, for the listeners, the germ theory of disease?
Well, that means that disease is transmitted by microscopic organisms that you can acquire by drinking dirty water or contamination of your food, that these are bacteria or viruses that grow and multiply in your body and that make you sick. It's not something from breathing bad air. It's from living microorganisms.
Why do you think it is that the powers that be are denying this?
Well, I think it's a matter of political correctness that this would involve critiquing things like allowing people to wander through the streets and live in a way that endangers the health of the whole population.
Are you seeing that the unfettered immigration is contributing to this and other outbreaks, or might contribute to more in the future?
Oh, I think that it definitely is, that we have people coming into the country that are not screened medically in any way, and sometimes are deliberately dispersed throughout the country and go to public schools and infect children with diseases to which the children have never been exposed before and they have no immunity. That was probably responsible for outbreaks of hundreds of cases of this enterovirus D68, I've forgotten exactly what it is, that sent a lot of American children to intensive care units, and some of them become paralyzed because it is a disease somewhat like polio in some people. And this probably came in from Central America, where it's endemic in the population. It doesn't usually make people very sick because they have some immunity to it, but American children just don't.
What are the elite's agenda in doing this?
One can only speculate. It seems that there are people who care more about political correctness than they do about the health of the average American citizen. I think they consider themselves to be sort of immune. They're protected. They live in an elite community. They're in charge of things. They're not like the rest of us deplorables who are barely getting by on what we can earn in this deindustrializing society. And I think they just really don't care about the average patient.
Wondering if perhaps you felt that they had another, more nefarious agenda.
Well, one can only speculate about why they think like this. I think some people don't think very deeply. They just go along with what seems to be the prevailing view. I think there are people who really want to destroy the United States of America, to destroy our economic and our military power, because we're the biggest impediment to their ideal of a global regime.
From reading about you and your organizations, you're not a fan of vaccines, but it seems like this particular vaccine for hepatitis A works. Would you recommend it?
Well, vaccines are sort of a good thing in some contexts, but like every medical intervention, they have risks and benefits. And in some situations, the benefit is definitely such that you would probably want to get vaccinated. In others, it may not be because the vaccine is more dangerous or because the disease is less prevalent or less fatal or less contagious or something. I think that whether you'd want to get hepatitis A vaccine if you live in San Diego is kind of debatable. I think maybe it's a very good idea if you're a food handler or you're working in a hospital for protection of other people, or if you're working in a hospital to protect yourself because you're at much higher risk than other people are. But I think if you can live in an environment where you're not exposed to filthy streets, then it's kind of up to you whether you want to protect yourself against a risk that's pretty small.
I don't know if they're force vaccinating these homeless people, but they are nonetheless offering this vaccine to them, and they vaccinated, I think, just under 200 homeless people when they have, I guess, thousands living on the streets there in San Diego. Of course, there's just an article that came out about a woman who they jailed for refusing a court order to vaccinate her child, and while she was in jail, the child was vaccinated. So it seems like they're really putting on the heat now with the vaccines, and I know that from paying some attention to it that prior to the first George Bush, the rate of vaccinations for school-age children in the United States was, I think, between 30 and 35%. And then he was ordered by Big Pharma to ramp that up to over 90%, which he dutifully did. And now, of course, I would imagine it's close to 100%. I know this is a little off topic here on the hepatitis matter, but what do you think's happening here with vaccinations in the United States?
Well, talk about denial. I think that people who deny that vaccines can have lifelong disabling, very serious complications is rampant. Vaccine manufacturers now have virtually absolute immunity from any type of liability. So they're really quite protected, even if they lie and cover up or are negligent about doing safety studies. So that's a problem. There's also a big financial incentive, like Blue Cross Blue Shield gives pediatricians a check of $400 per child if a huge proportion of their children are vaccinated. So there's this hype that, well, if you go to the doctor's office and there's an unvaccinated child in the waiting room, you're in great danger. That maybe uses a pretext for forcing vaccines on people, which is really scaremongering. You can't get measles, for example, from a child who doesn't have measles. Whether he had the vaccine or not is sort of irrelevant. But I think that there's just a lot of pressure. The prevention is greater than cure and other platitudes like that. And I just think that mass imposition of any type of medical intervention is a very bad idea. It's contrary to our civil rights. And it's also just a very imprudent idea because a lot of times we don't find out about the bad effects of the medical things we do until it's too late.
And again, is there some kind of nefarious agenda with the vaccinations?
Again, you have to wonder. I think most pediatricians are just reciting what they're taught in medical school, and that there's a lot of pressure to conform, and to prevent your conscience from being bothered, it's helpful not to think about it and just to accept what the authorities tell us. But the prospect that the authorities maybe not be telling us the whole truth about everything is far more dangerous than hepatitis A, or probably more dangerous than even Ebola.
Yeah, it seems like we're not going in the right direction here. Doc, what do you think the future holds for the civil rights of Americans as far as vaccinations, as far as being swept up in a big vaccination net because they're bringing in these immigrants unfettered, spreading them purposefully throughout the country, as you said, and that's a fact. And the economy, as you mentioned, is deindustrializing, so people are out of work. They can't make any money. They're out on the streets. Is it a sanguine outlook for the United States?
I think the United States is in serious danger, existential hazard really, of loss of the freedom on which our prosperity depends, as well as just a decent civilized life. If you're constantly harassing or persecuting or jailing or fining people because they don't do what you want, we're sliding on the way to Venezuela.
Now, your organizations, how do they survive financially?
Well, we at AAPS and DDP, we are dependent on dues-paying members. We do not have any business interests. We do not have any government grants. We do not have a monopoly on government codes that we sell to physicians, so that we don't even need to care whether people renew their membership or not.
People donate to the organization as well?
Yes, donations to Doctors for Disaster Preparedness are tax-deductible. Those to AAPS are not, although we do have a tax-exempt organization, the American Health Legal Foundation, which can accept tax-deductible donations.
Are there websites that folks can go to if they want to support what you're doing?
Yes, we have aapsonline.org, and for Doctors for Disaster Preparedness, it's ddponline.org. A clean environment and sanitary habits are indispensable. We don't have a vaccine for every disease that exists. We have got to break the chain of transmission by just cleanliness.
Dr. Jane Ourian, Dr. Ourian, I want to thank you so much for the time you spent explaining all this to the listeners today. Obviously, you're doing great work, and you're a great American, and thank you so much for the time you spent today, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again real soon.
Well, thank you very much, David. I think that it's a great service that you're doing to the public by trying to inform them about things that just are not being covered in the mainstream media.